Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content. One of the most common things I hear whenever I talk about the Cleveland Browns, especially after a bad season or we realize that a trade that the team made had very, very poor results for the team, the number one comment or the number two comment in that video is always going to be something along the lines of, this team will never get good as long as Jimmy Haslam owns the team. And I get why that is a common sentiment, right? I'm no believer in the football acumen of Jimmy and D. Haslam. I believe them to be pretty clueless about football operations in the same way that like every other owner of an NFL team is pretty goddamn clueless, right? You don't get $1 billion to run not even $1 billion anymore. You don't get the $7 to $10 billion you need to buy an NFL team by knowing anything about the NFL. You get that by having expertise elsewhere. That dynamic right there is why people will blame every problem that the team has realistically on ownership. They're the top of the hierarchy, right? And because they are the sole decision maker, at the end of the day, nothing gets done without ownership saying yes or no. There's no board that ownership has to appeal to. There's no vote that ownership has to win. It's purely based on if Jimmy and D want to do something or don't want to do something. Do they want to fire people or do they not want to fire people? You can put together a committee. You could put together all this stuff. It doesn't have any binding over what football operations can do. The famous example of the Browns being 4-1 in favor of hiring Sean McDermott, but not hiring Sean McDermott because the one vote was Jimmy Haslam. It's real easy when you hear stuff like that and when you know that that's the dynamic at the end of the day to say that that person is going to be the reason that you aren't successful. And you aren't technically wrong about that person being the problem. I think the issue is that too much focus goes towards the individual that owns the team and not really enough towards the system that creates the incompetence in the first place. See, the problem with ownership is what I just described. They are at the top of the hierarchy, but they are the least qualified person in that entire hierarchy. So they have the position where the most qualified people in football ops have to answer to this guy, while this guy is in a position where the owner is in a position where they don't have the experience necessary to be a sufficient guy to answer to. Think about a traditional structure at your job, right? Most of us have jobs with bosses, and most of these places operate on a pretty familiar kind of way, right? You have a job. You have an objective at your job. You have a thing you're supposed to do or task you're supposed to complete at your job. If you work in fast food, it's drive-through times. If you work in other fields, you can fill out whatever it is that your objective is, right? If you work in construction, it's whatever they're telling you to fix, whatever it is. That is how jobs work. Now, if you have a task at your job and you're very good at completing those tasks, if you have a competent boss, they're not going to feel the need to micromanage you because they have trust that you're going to be able to complete whatever it is that they asked of you. So you get to do your job and have a little bit of free reign over how you do your job without feeling like somebody is constraining you. That's usually how a functional workplace is supposed to work. Obviously, people have shitty bosses. Bosses don't know what the fuck they're doing. Bosses, no matter what you're doing, they won't trust you. But that's how workplaces work. That's how the workplace hierarchy is supposed to work. You have a goal. If you achieve that goal, then the person in charge of you is not in your shit. If you don't complete your goal, then all of a sudden the person in charge of you is in your shit. It's the same way in football. Football teams have an objective. The objective is to win as many games in a 17-game season as possible to qualify for the playoffs and to try to win a championship. So if you are a football team and your operation is winning games, ownership naturally is not going to feel a need to be involved in football operations. But if you're a team that does not win a ton of games, naturally football operations is going to be affected by ownership because that's who's going to be the person who is supposed to hold that operation accountable. The problem is the hierarchy of it all, right? The problem is that you can't own an NFL team based on merit, right? You own an NFL team based on capital. That is what decides this whole thing at the end of the day. And that is why whenever teams struggle, they have owners who decide to make decisions. And those decisions, it creates this dynamic that can turn into a vicious cycle unless you stumble upon a quarterback or something that's going to give you a floor in the loss column. You end up in this vicious cycle where you lose games. Because you're losing games, ownership decides to get involved. And because ownership is not really qualified to make these decisions, they end up making bad decisions that make the team bad, which then puts ownership in a position where they have to hold that team accountable and they have to make more football decisions. This is the cycle that the Cleveland Browns have been stuck in my entire life. I hear people all the time talk about if the Browns just sold the team to somebody else, they'd be much better off. In my lifetime, the Browns have had 3 owners. If you're older than me and you were born before the Browns moved to Baltimore, you have seen 4 owners in your lifetime. Has it made a tangible difference in the quality of football that the Cleveland Browns have put out? Like, was the Randy Lerner run Cleveland Browns any less of a mess than the Jimmy Haslam ran Cleveland Browns? It's really not. We just forgot a lot of the bullshit that came with Randy Lerner. And ironically enough, his unwillingness to invest in football operations, right? Like, he had the exact opposite problem that people think Jimmy have, right? People think Jimmy's too involved. He wants to spend too much money and make too many decisions in football ops. Randy Lerner didn't want to spend money. Randy Lerner didn't want to be involved. You know, he really didn't care. It was his dad's thing, not his. I've seen both of those approaches in Cleveland. I've seen both of those approaches have horrendous results at the end of the day because it's the hierarchy that's the problem. And you can't escape the hierarchy when it comes to NFL ownership. All teams are going to be owned by somebody other than like the Green Bay Packers. But unless the NFL votes to abolish ownership at the next owner meeting, probably not going to happen for obvious reasons. So 31 teams have people who own the teams who aren't really qualified to be at the top of the hierarchy. And that's going to create problems when you lose games, because when you lose games, somebody has to make decisions, and who gets to make decisions above the head coach and general manager? It's the owner, and that guy doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. The Browns could sell to another owner tomorrow, and you're going to have the same issue. That's the problem with ownership. It's the hierarchy that they are in charge of that creates all of the problems, and that hierarchy exists for all 32 teams. Really think about all the times Jimmy Haslam has decided to interject himself into football operations and make a decision that pissed you off. It's usually after a bad season, isn't it? It's not after like the Browns win a ton of games. Like, has Jimmy Haslam, did he do anything worth note in 2020? I don't think so. Did he do anything worth note in 2023? I think he just extended Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski and gave them more power in football operations. Like, that's what happened. But when does Jimmy get involved? Well, Jimmy gets involved when the team loses, and that's for very obvious reasons. He's the guy who has the power to do something, or who has the role to where he has to do something if the team loses. You're not going to good owner your way out of this problem. There's really one way out of this problem. What is that one way? I'll talk about it, but first let me talk about my sponsor, Sleeper. So it's Super Bowl week, And I think a fun thing to do with the Sleeper app would be to do at least 5 days of 5 different slips for picks on Sleeper. So every day you watch my channel, I'm going to be going over a different themed pick list that I have in for the Super Bowl. Defense wins championships. Well, will defense win championships on Sunday in the biggest game of the year? Let's go through some of my defensive-oriented picks here. This is a crazy one, a 62.5x payout on $5. We'll see if I can get this to go for me. I got a Kaylavon Chason sack in here. I have a Drake May interception and Drake May being under the 222 passing yards numbers. Also have the Marcus Lawrence in here getting a sack. Sam Darnold getting a interception. And then Sam Darnold being under 232 yards. Same thing with Jackson Smith and Jigba being under 94 yards. So we'll see if I'm going to be able to have some fun with that one, a defensive-oriented Super Bowl. But if you want to join the fun, make sure you join the Sleeper app. Use my promo code WORSTTAKE. Get a 100% match on up to $100 when you use the promo code WORSTTAKE. Thank you for Sleeper for sponsoring this video. Now, back to the video. The only way out of this problem for the Cleveland Browns is winning football games. If you want ownership to be less involved, if you want Jimmy Haslam or whatever owner runs this team, whether it be D. Haslam or Jimmy Haslam, the 4th or the 5th or the 6th, if you want that person, no matter what time, decade you're watching this video, to be less involved with the Cleveland Browns, the answer is very simple. You got to win some football games. Because that's the only thing that will make a difference. If you win football games, ownership will be less involved. Ownership will have more trust in football operations. And the more you win, the more credibility you build with ownership. So that if something does go wrong and you have a couple of shitty seasons, ownership does not feel the need to blow things up. That's what you need. The Browns need positive equity in football operations, and the way that you build positive equity in football operations is by winning football games, which is why this season is really important that they win some games. They don't have to get to the Super Bowl. They don't have to even get to the second round of the playoffs. Hell, they don't even have to make the playoffs, but they do have to win a sufficient amount of football games this year. I hope we all understand this, because if they don't win football games, like the Browns have some level of structure that's hanging on from a thread here with Andrew Berry still largely being in charge of football operations. But if Andrew gets fired after this season because they don't win enough games, we know what's going to happen. And even some of you want to fire Andrew. I don't know if we've really thought this one out, but what's going to happen if Andrew gets fired is Jimmy's back in sole control of football operations. And you can say what you want about Andrew Berry's track record. Jimmy Haslam's track record is 12 times worse. If you want to avoid that, you got to win some games. It's just going to be required. You got to win about I don't know how many games they have to win to get to that point, but I'm thinking 7 to 10 games probably would do it. If you win anywhere between that number, you're not going to feel the need to make a ton of changes. You're going to have some trust in football operations, and they're going to get another opportunity to build positive equity, which is winning more games. But they got to win some games. They got to do it soon. This is not a year where the Browns could tank and go all in on losing. They don't have the positive equity to do that. They are running at a positive equity deficit. It is fascinating that they've even gotten to this point, to be honest with you, right? It is fascinating that the 2 winning seasons that Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry had has bought them enough rain to get here. After the John Watson trade, all of this stuff that went down, it is fascinating that they're still hanging on by some thread. And that thread can survive if they win some games this year. If the Browns can win some games this year, Maybe they get a draft pick or an opportunity to get a quarterback in the draft. Maybe they don't. But what they will get is an opportunity to build on top of what they've done. And if they can build on top of that and get a winning structure built, that puts them in a better position to be able to identify a quarterback down the line and develop that quarterback down the line. Maybe they become a good landing spot for an already established quarterback, but they gotta win some games. And I want to be clear here. I don't think it's just the Browns who have to do this dance. I think all teams that have a billionaire owner at the top of their structure have to do this dance, and you can debate whether that dance is more preferable than like a dance that the Bengals have to do. Because, all the Browns really have to do is keep Jimmy Haslam out of football operations. The Bengals have to overcome the fact that the Bengals are ran in a cheap way. So you have to deal with budget constraints. And those budget constraints affect football operations, even when the team is winning games, right? If the Browns win games, they're probably going to be fine. But the Bengals don't have that luxury. They went to a Super Bowl not that long ago, but they're still having that budget be cut because they're trying to actually make money off of the Bengals. You can argue that that's a worse structure than what the Browns have or a worse obstacle than what the Browns have. But all teams that have an owner at the top of its hierarchy have to overcome that owner in some way to be successful. The Browns are no different. The Browns are not unique. There are other teams that have worse to deal with than the Cleveland Browns. And I don't think ownership is an excuse for why the team has been as pathetic as they've been over the last 25 years. There are so many reasons why the Browns haven't been good. There's not one thing I can point to that's why the Browns haven't been good. There are just like a million different reasons that have worked together in conjunction over the last 25 years that have put the Browns in the position that they are in, right? So I'm not going to blame and point all of this on Jimmy Haslam or Al Lerner or Randy Lerner or any other individual, right? Like there are so many reasons why the Browns haven't been successful. But I'm just here to talk about what they could do to put themselves in the best position to be successful going forward. And I think that position is obvious. Just be very focused on trying to win as many games as you can. Obviously, within reason, I don't want them to go all out and try to like ruin their cap health or something stupid like that just so they can win an extra game. Win within reason, right? Keep the roster young, keep the cap flexible, but try to win as many games as you can. Put the team in a position that people can be optimistic about it, that ownership can be optimistic about it and the direction it's going for, so we can keep football operations ran by people with football in their backgrounds instead of it being ran by the owner, which no matter what team you are in the NFL, it's going to result in bad shit. That's my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.